Now, every once in a while, an on-air exchange slips through the cracks on one of the other cable networks that's worth watching. Such was the case this morning on CNN, of all places, where they booked a point-counterpoint on critical race theory.
Schools should absolutely be teaching reading, writing, arithmetic. They should not be radicalizing our kids. And unfortunately, schools are now radicalizing our kids. I mean, this is the volume of the book from critical race theory that, as people say, teach in law schools. But unfortunately, it is now trickling down into little books for children like Woke Baby, Gender Queer. In it, there is unfortunately very graphic symbol of pedophilia and pornography.
Asra Nomani, who's been a guest frequently on The Angle over the years, came armed with tabbed copies of the books used in the schools, with specific page citations and a very calm, thorough, irrefutable presentation that left the host kind of grasping. Entered the defender of critical race theory in this discussion, a guy who was billed as simply a concerned parent, but who actually works the diversity, equity, and inclusion racket in Austin, Texas, telling companies and individuals to check their white privilege and re-examine their obsession with merit-based hiring. Turns out that's a lucrative business. But money can't buy you logic. Instead of refuting Ms. Nomani's evidence proving the poisonous effects of CRT curricula, he merely pulled a Terry McAuliffe, saying parents should generally stop butting in, leave education to the experts, presumably experts like him.
Of too many people who know little or nothing about education trying to tell professionals who are in this industry who've been working hard. We're coming in as weekend warriors trying to tell them about what education should look like. We need to put a little bit more trust in our educators because they've actually spent the time and energy necessary to really understand some of the nuances that are being kind of just blown over here in this conversation.
Now, what does any of that mean? You may wonder. Well, it means it's not yours to question. These topics are simply too complex for the little people to understand. Yet, what's there to understand about reading assigned to our children that associates white people with the devil?
It literally says here, whiteness is a bad deal, and it has a symbol of Satan. And this is the contract that they say whiteness brings. And children are getting this book. And I fit into the intersectional world. I'm a Muslim, I'm an immigrant, I'm a mom of color, I am a single mom, but yet I deny all of these, privileges in the new paradigm of the oppression matrix because we're all human beings.
That Miss Nomani is highly educated and a minority herself doesn't matter. For the DEI cabal, all that matters is marketing guilt and shame to schools, corporations, entertainers, and sports figures. And of course, the churches are in on the act. Each comes under enormous pressure to comply. They prove their DEI bona fides by linking to goofy DEI posters like this one, or by hiring people not on merit, but according to the latest woke rules. And of course, by shunning anyone who refuses to mouth their platitudes or who questions their goals. DEI propaganda, like CCP propaganda, must never be questioned by the unenlightened masses.
The language that I'm hearing used here doesn't really speak to the level of sophistication that I think is necessary to help our young people be prepared for the world of work, for the society that they're going to be living in. As someone who worked in universities, we had too many students who were coming to the university who had little or no experience of knowing how to navigate the conversations and relationships that were related to race.
What gibberish! Don't you feel better about paying that fat college tuition now? But you may not know it. But schools and businesses are desperate to check the diversity, equity, inclusion box that they'll either hire a full-time DEI coordinator or they'll feel like they have to hire random DEI consultants they find on the web. Meet Ritu Bhasin, founder of Bhasin Consulting, Inc. Her firm is described as a world-renowned full-service DEI consulting firm dedicated to driving organizational change.
And when I say whiteness, I'm talking about the embodiment of white American, white Anglo, white Eurocentric ways of behaving, put you in a place where you are better, more deserving, more competent, and more over people who embody behaviors that connect back to communities of color and Indigenous communities. And the connection between racism and white supremacy is that racism is a manifestation of white supremacy.
What a terrible way to make a living. No real knowledge of history, zero appreciation of the great blessings of liberty and opportunity that America provides, only resentment politics and a lot of hand movements. And yes, the point of this is to turn neighbor against neighbor, student against student, citizen against country.
The white populace has always been susceptible to manipulation around racial animus.
This is really about white people, and particularly white children, now being exposed to ideas that I think previously were segregated, frankly.
If your children's school teaches this nonsense, demand that your son or daughter be permitted to opt out in favor of, I don't know, those unaccomplished writers like Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Twain, Harriet Beecher Stowe, other great American writers. But remember, the goals are always shifting for the DEI crowd. 20 years ago, it was tolerance for different points of view. But that wasn't getting the far left anywhere. So then they shifted to demanding diversity. But that, too, they found to be limiting. So they moved on again. Lecturer Paloma Medina gave a tutorial to a packed auditorium on how to establish true racial and gender equity in your workplace.
We need to verbalize the right goal. The goal isn't diversity. The goal is equity. Instead of saying that you're going to form a diversity committee, hire outside experts to help you audit for and then achieve equity in salary and promotions. You can do it in 2 years. You can.
Look at those clapping seals in the audience. They don't even realize that the speaker is shilling for her own industry, and her solutions would mean forcing a lot of them in the audience out of jobs and hiring others purely on racial or gender lines. Now, the temptation is to laugh at this cottage industry for the perpetually aggrieved. Oh yeah, but to do that is just a mistake. Real racism is repugnant, and everyone but the lowest of the low know it. But what we're doing to our schools, our workplaces, our everyday life is corrosive and divisive. The only people we really help by hiring, firing, or promoting people based on immutable characteristics are the people getting rich off teaching bitterness and virtue signaling, where hard work and effort will usually suffice. And remember, they're not alone. Every piece of this garbage that the hard left spouts is now treated as gospel by President Biden and his entire team.
America has a long history of systemic racism.
Systemic racism is a stain on our nation's soul. The knee on the neck of justice for Black Americans.
We must improve equity within and between our countries and close economic, political, and social gaps that persist based on race, gender, and other parts of our identity.
They'll use every bit of their power, and that's a lot of power, to force you to live in a country dominated by the DEI police. Which takes us back to that discussion that caught my attention earlier today. What a great country it is that a Muslim American woman who arrived here not speaking our language is far better versed in the guarantees of our Constitution and the meaning of our Declaration than countless native-born DEI experts, not to mention the buffoons now occupying the White House. Think of the tens of millions of immigrants who become small business owners and successful professionals, and who did so, by the way, without relying on government handouts or DEI mandates to clear the path for themselves. So maybe, just maybe, it's time for us to focus more on parenting and less on complaining, more on showcasing talent and less obsessing on race or ethnicity. And that's The Angle.
I'm Steve Doocy. I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.